All right, today we're putting your knowledge to the test with a quiz that connects our world, right now, to a seriously violent and alien chapter in Earth's deep past. There are 10 questions standing between you and the title of Siderian Scholar. So, you think you're ready? Let's find out. Just think about it for a second. The very air you just breathed in, the iron in your blood that's carrying that oxygen through your body, even the steel that holds up our cities, they all share a single, incredibly dramatic origin story. And that story starts 2.5 billion years ago, in an era we called the Siderian period. Okay, let's kick off round one. First question up. In the whole 4.6 billion year saga of our planet, when exactly did the Siderian period actually happen? And the answer is from 2.5 to 2.3 billion years ago. Now, you might hear 200 million years and think, whoa, that's forever. But geologically speaking, it's just a flash in the pan. I mean, the dinosaurs were around for about 165 million years. In a similar amount of time, our planet was completely reinvented. We're talking its oceans, its atmosphere. The entire future of life was rewritten. Question 2. The name Siderian is actually a massive clue. So what does it mean? And where on Earth today can we literally go and touch the physical evidence from this ancient time? If you guessed iron, you nailed it. Siderian comes right from the Greek sideros for iron. And the proof? Oh, it's not subtle. It's locked away in these colossal rock formations called banded iron formations in places like Australia and South Africa. These aren't just pretty rocks. They are the fossilized rust of an entire ancient ocean. And get this, they're the source of almost all the iron and steel we use today. Okay, for our final question in this round, I want you to use your imagination. Before this whole great transformation, what color were the sky and the oceans? Go ahead, take a guess. You know, it's hard to even wrap your head around it, but Earth was a completely alien planet. The sky wasn't blue. It was this hazy orange smog just thick with methane. And the oceans? Nope, not blue either. They were a murky kind of olive green because they were just saturated with dissolved iron. This was a planet just waiting for a revolution that would eventually turn it into the familiar blue marble we know and love. So, that weird green and orange world was on the brink of a total makeover. And this brings us to round 2. The revolution wasn't driven by volcanoes or asteroids. It was biological. So, question 4. What microscopic organism was the planet's primary environmental engineer, and what toxic new gas was it pumping out? The answer is cyanobacteria. These incredible little microbes figured out a brand new trick to get energy, photosynthesis. And in the process, they started releasing a waste product. And that waste, which was completely toxic to them and pretty much everything else alive at the time, was oxygen. They were about to poison an entire world to create a new one. So you've got this new gas, oxygen, suddenly flooding into the iron-rich oceans, and it immediately starts a chemical war. This leads us right into question 5. What in the world was iron snow, and where did all that iron come from in the first place? Okay, so here's how you rust an entire planet. Step 1. Undersea volcanoes are just pumping the oceans full of dissolved iron. Step 2. Our new friends, the cyanobacteria, start filling that water with oxygen. Step 3. The oxygen and iron react instantly, forming iron oxide. Yep, rust. And step 4. This rust couldn't stay dissolved in the water, so it fell out, creating this relentless reddish-brown storm of iron snow that rained down on the seafloor for millions of years. The oceans were now basically scrubbed clean of their iron, but the atmosphere was still that thick, orange methane smog. So for question 6, what was the game-changing event that finally turned our hazy orange sky into the crisp blue we see today? This, my friends, was the big one, the Great Oxidation Event. Once the oceans couldn't absorb any more iron, oxygen just flooded the atmosphere. It immediately attacked that methane haze, breaking it down into carbon dioxide and water vapor. Suddenly, the orange smog cleared, the skies turned blue, and for the very first time in its 2 billion year history, Earth became the blue planet. So, Earth is finally starting to look like home. But, for the life that was already there, this new world was an absolute house of horrors. This brings us to round 3, and the dark side of oxygen. Question 7. How did this new gas affect the planet's dominant life forms? To put it mildly, it was a catastrophe. See, oxygen is incredibly reactive. It literally tears apart the building blocks of life. For all the anaerobic microbes living at the time, this gas was a corrosive poison that shredded their cell membranes and shattered their DNA. It triggered one of the very first and maybe the most complete mass extinctions our world has ever known. So when we talk about this massive planetary die-off, you might be picturing some pretty weird ancient creatures, right? It's a common thought. Which brings us to question 8. Were there any Siderian period animals at all? The answer is a simple, straightforward, resounding no. 0. Zilch. There were no animals, no plants, no fungi, not a single thing you could see with the naked eye. The world was entirely microbial. The most complex life was basically slimy mats of bacteria on the seafloor. It was a silent, empty world, completely ruled by the microscopic. But hold on. If oxygen was starting to show up, why didn't complex life take off? What was holding things back? That's question 9. What specific environmental threshold acted like a gatekeeper, keeping life microscopic for another 1.5 billion years? And the answer comes down to this one simple number, about 1% of the oxygen levels we have today. Now, that was a huge jump from 0, but it just wasn't enough fuel. Complex bodies, predators, moving around, all that stuff requires huge amounts of energy, and only high levels of oxygen can provide that. The Siderian was building the theater, but the main actors were still over 1 billion years away from their debut. All right, we're heading into the final round. We've explored this alien world that was transformed by poison and rust. Now, let's bring it all home. Question 10. How does the legacy of this ancient, violent period connect directly to our survival right here in this very moment? Here it is, the Siderian's triple legacy. First, all that iron snow provided the iron for our entire industrial civilization and, even more crucial, for the hemoglobin molecules that carry oxygen in our blood. Second, the Great Oxygenation Event generated the very air we breathe. And third, that oxygen in the atmosphere created the ozone layer, our planet's shield, without which life could never have moved onto land. All right, the moment of truth. Grab your notes, tally up your score. Let's see how you did. If you got 8 to 10 correct, congratulations. You are a true Siderian scholar. 5 to 7, you're a Proterozoic professional. You really get it. And if you got 1 to 4, you are a primordial explorer, just starting out on an amazing journey into our planet's deepest stories. When you really think about it, the main takeaway is just this. Pretty much every part of our modern world is built on what happened during this ancient period. Our cities, our technology, our own biology, they are all direct gifts from an era when the entire planet literally began to rust. And believe it or not, this whole global rusting event, that was just the beginning. It kicked off a chain reaction that triggered a deep freeze, plunging the entire planet into a snowball Earth. And it all took place on a lost supercontinent you've probably never even heard of. To find out more, well, the complete guide is waiting for you. So today, we're going to take a trip back in time, way back. We're going to one of the most dramatic, destructive, and honestly, one of the most creative periods in our planet's entire 4.5 billion year history, the Siderian period. This is an era that shaped everything we know in ways you'd probably never guess. Okay, so let me start with a question for you. I want you to think about the air you're breathing right this second. Now think about the seal that holds up our tallest buildings, our entire modern world, really. And then think about your own eyes, the very things you're using to see this right now. What on earth could possibly connect those 3 things? Well, the wild thing is, they all trace their origins back to this one single ancient chapter in Earth's history. It's this deep, fundamental connection that ties you, your body, and our world to a time that's, well, it's almost impossible to imagine. So let's find out how it all went down. We're going to head back 2.5 billion years into the past to see how this ancient era literally built the foundation for everything that came after. Here's what we've got on deck. We'll start by exploring the totally alien world Earth used to be. Then we'll witness the day the entire planet started to rust. We'll uncover why oxygen was actually a deadly poison, bust a pretty common myth about ancient animals, and finally, see how this incredible story is really far from over. All right, first things first, you have to get a picture in your head of just how different our planet was. Before the Siderian, if you were to stand on Earth, you wouldn't recognize it at all. For all intents and purposes, it was a completely alien world. I mean, the contrast is just stark. Forget a nice blue sky. The atmosphere was this thick, hazy orange, full of methane, probably looking a lot like Saturn's moon Titan. And the oceans? Nope, not blue. They were a strange, unsettling green because they were just saturated with dissolved iron. And of course, there was basically no oxygen to breathe. The name of the period, Siderian, actually gives us a massive clue. It comes from the ancient Greek word for iron, sideros, and it's named that for a very good reason. This is the period when almost all of the iron ore that we mine and use today was formed, all at once, in this truly planet-spanning event. And that brings us to the main event, really. This wasn't just some age of iron. This was the age when the entire planet began to rust. So here's the play-by-play. These tiny, simple microbes called cyanobacteria figured out a brand new trick, photosynthesis. And as a waste product, they started pumping out tons and tons of oxygen into those green iron-filled oceans. That new oxygen immediately slammed into the dissolved iron, creating iron oxide. Yep, rust. This rust was heavy, and it started to snow down to the bottom of the ocean, relentlessly, for millions of years, building up layer after layer. Those layers are the iron deposits we mine today. And the visual impact of this was just unbelievable. As oxygen eventually seeped into the atmosphere, it destroyed that methane haze. The orange sky vanished, and for the very first time in our planet's history, the sky turned blue. It was literally the moment Earth was reborn as the blue planet. This whole crazy process has a name, the Great Oxidation Event, or the GOE for short. Now, the word event makes it sound like it happened on a Tuesday afternoon, but this was a slow, grinding, chemical takeover of an entire world playing out over tens of millions of years. But here's the kicker. For you and me, oxygen is life, right? We can't live without it. But for almost all life on Earth back then, this new, beautiful gas was the single most toxic poison the world had ever seen. It was a global catastrophe. So why was it so deadly? Well, oxygen is incredibly reactive. It's a chemical bully. It just loves to rip electrons off of other molecules. It's what rusts metals and what lets fire burn organic matter. For all the anaerobic life at the time, this new gas was an absolute nightmare. It tore apart their cell membranes and literally shredded their DNA. It was a global contamination event on a scale we can't even fathom. And this is exactly why the Great Oxidation Event is also called the oxygen catastrophe, because the very thing that paved the way for us to exist triggered what was almost certainly the first and maybe the biggest mass extinction in the history of life. It wiped out untold numbers of microbial species. Just think about that for a second. Before this moment, there had never been a planet-wide die-off. Life had been humming along for over 1 billion years, but this was the first time the planet's own chemistry turned so viciously against its inhabitants. This was number one. So this strange, alien, toxic world, it makes you wonder, right? With all this drama going on, what kind of creatures were actually swimming around in those rusty oceans? People search for Siderian period animals all the time. You might imagine some weird, primitive trilobites or maybe some early jellyfish. It's a cool idea. But is it true? The answer, from all the scientific evidence we have, is a very simple, very direct no. There were no animals, no plants either, no fungi, not a single one. And there are two really big reasons why. First, energy. Having a complex body with lots of cells takes a huge amount of energy. The kind of low-grade energy that life was using before oxygen just wasn't going to cut it. You need the high-octane burn that only oxygen can provide. And second, even though oxygen was rising, the levels were still tiny, maybe 1 or 2% of what we have today. It was just enough to poison the old world, but nowhere near enough to build a new one full of animals. So what we have is a world of microbes, rust, and poison. But the important thing to remember is that this catastrophe wasn't just an ending. It was a violent, destructive, but absolutely necessary beginning for the world that we now call home. The Siderian period basically set the stage. It created our oxygen atmosphere, it gave us the iron we would one day use to build civilizations, and it cleared out the old guard to make way for new forms of life. But the main actors, the big, complex animals, well, they wouldn't make their entrance for another 1.5 billion years. The patience of geology is just mind-boggling.
And honestly, we have barely scratched the surface of this incredible time.
The complete story is even wilder. For anyone who wants to go deeper, the full guide explores how this event plunged the entire Earth into a frozen snowball state, the rise and fall of a lost supercontinent called Kennerland, and how the formation of the ozone layer, our planet's sunshield, was a direct result of all this. It all leaves you with one final, kind of profound thought to chew on. From the iron atoms in your own blood that carry oxygen to the very air you're breathing, how much of who we are and the world we live in was only made possible by a planetary poisoning that happened 2.5 billion years ago? The greatest catastrophe in history was also, in the end, the greatest act of creation.